Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest, Alberto Nunez. So if you aren't familiar with him, he is a WNBF pro natural bodybuilder and a coach at 3DMJ and has put out a ton of great content over the years in this space. So really honored to have you on. Welcome onto the show.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, you said it had been a little bit since you've been on a podcast, so I'm honored to be able to be one of the ones that you're coming on. Do you not do a lot of podcasts regularly, or?
I think people just feel like you're a little, I wouldn't say, I mean, I'm a busy guy, but at the same time, like to me, it's always worth having these sort of discussions, making time with people outside of your immediate network, because when I do my own podcast, like it has its own flavor and, it sticks to that brand. So venturing out, man, like some of my favorite podcasts have been things like when I've done the Mark Bell podcast, I've been on that one a few times, and that one's just like, that one's way out in space. So yeah, it's I enjoy these, and you're heavily into like natural bodybuilding, so like those are even more fun.
Yeah, I enjoy it, and then obviously like muscle hypertrophy and things like that are kind of my go-to. And then you're coach with 3DMJ, and I've had on Jeff Alberts and Eric Helms, and obviously those guys are super. Again, they put out a ton of great content in this space too. So yeah, and I guess we'll kind of switch to your background for people who aren't super familiar with you. If you don't mind kind of going over that, maybe how you got into fitness and kind of what you have done in the past year in this industry.
Yeah, shoot, man, like it's the last thing I ever saw myself doing was like lifting weights. My pops did it for a few years, and he had way better genetics than I. So like he was like the swole pops on the block, and it goes like you rebel against like whatever it is that your parents are doing. So and the opportunity was there. He's like, do it. I'm like, no, I'm good. And then finally, friend convinced me to do it over a summer, and like right away, it wasn't even like for any particular reason. I was just like, man, this feels like so good, like a place to take this like teenage energy and like put it into something. So did that, and like it got to the point where it went from like doing it to hang out with a buddy to like ditching buddies to go do this thing. So it ended up being a very positive distraction. I'd say if anything, it continued to kind of just keep me on track like through my 20s. Like I've kind of lived an inverse life where it's like I'd stay at home on Friday night, because I didn't want to hamper my recovery, and I wanted to hit the books when it comes to like bodybuilding. One thing led to another. Eventually it's like, hey, I got to do something with this. Like it's, you get bored, so you set up some challenging goals, and the competition side of things like that always intrigued me. Like I remember seeing Lane Norton's it was on the bodybuilding.com forums. He was just logging his competition season when he was 19, and seeing him start at 20 weeks out and just saying, this is 20 weeks out and I'm going to make it on time, and I'm going to look very different in 20 weeks. Like I was like, wow, that's appealing, like to have that much control over your body. So I had to jump in there, and dude, like now I'm here. First competition was in 2007, got my pro status in 2008, and just wrapped up my most recent season in 2022. So it's gone by really fast. I spent the majority of my life training at this point, which is like insane, but like I can't live any other way.
So for you, how long did it kind of take in between where you started lifting and then you competed in your first show?
I had other athletic and things that were distracting me, like namely track and field. Here was the issue though. It was like I was far more talented at that, so I didn't work as hard. And I remember it got to a certain point where I'm like, okay, what's truly best for you? Like, and I decided, you know what? Like at 19, I'm like, this bodybuilding thing is it's so much better in regards to just cultivating the culture around me that is in the long term going to do me best. I'm like, track practice, you can't skip track practice. Show up on track day and like do decently well. You know how it goes with bodybuilding. It's like the weeks they compound on top of each other. So yeah, at 19, I was like, all right, I'm done with that. and just committed fully to bodybuilding. I told myself, you know what, 3 years. I'm gonna give myself 3 years to just be super consistent. And actually, we talked about this a little bit off air, and I bulked up to 250 because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. So it seemed like a reasonable thing. So I went literally from like 140 when like I had this foot injury that just wouldn't heal, and I'm like, all right, I guess like no track season, to 250 evening weight in clothes. Did it once. I just wanted to do it once, and that happened over the span of 3 years basically, and then 2 years later, no, a year and a half later, I ended up competing. And yeah, like most of us, found out that, oh, this is what contest shape is like. I got up to that 190, and I was like, all right, okay, taking notes. We'll do better next time.
Yeah, that was I wanted to talk to you about your dreamer bulk, as you call it. And it's like you always kind of get to that point to where you think you're going to be way heavier than what you are, and then it's kind of a eye-opening thing when you realize, wow, I don't have as much muscle as I thought, and whatnot. So for you, so it sounds like, I mean, you first competed in 2017, and then you got your pro card the next year. So do you feel like for you found out pretty quickly that, that was going to be something for you, and you felt like you had a pretty good future in the sport?
Yeah, I think I thought I could do reasonably well. Like, you know how it goes. It's like, not until you've been to a dog show can you like actually like, but I felt like, hey, like, I think just generally speaking, comparing myself to other folks at the gym, I'm like, I think there's, something there. But I think more than anything, I needed that extra like I needed to continue my athletic career. And bodybuilding it fits my personality. And I think a lot of us are nerds at the end of the day. I think especially now more than ever, like the I guess the archetype of the typical meatheads, like some dude that just like lifts weights and doesn't do much else. But like, no, furthest thing from the case. Like we tend to be inquisitive people. We love science. We love experimenting with things. We like getting our hands dirty when it comes to the iron. So yeah, I knew this is what I wanted to do, like from here until like forever. The sport thing, I was like, let's see if I like it, because I mean, it's weird, man. You get your first set of posing trunks in the mail, and you're like, whoa, especially for me, man. I came from the generation where, like, I tell my mom frequently, I'm not wearing those shorts, man. That's too short. Like, I'm not taking those to school.
So, you kind of mentioned too that your dad had better genetics than you, but I think a lot of people would look at you and think that, you have great genetics too, right? I know one of your things that you're known for, if people aren't familiar, is, you very, very vascular, right? So was that something that you've kind of always noticed, or was that, did that take you a little bit of time to kind of see that? And is there anything that you specifically do there with that, or is it just basically going to be genetics with that? Because you have some pretty, if anyone hasn't seen, you have some pretty freaky pictures from really any of your preps that you've done of how vascular you get.
Yeah, I think it was, man, I think upon hitting puberty, like I've had, I think, bicep veins since I hit puberty in like sports, like people don't realize this, but like, especially a lot of the power sports, you're kind of lifting weights, when you're like dragging your butt as hard as you can across the track. It's like, that's a strength sport at the end. So yeah, I've always been decently like lean, decently vascular. I guess when I say like my father would have better genetics, like my thing is, this is funny because I ran the 400, like that was the event that at the end I was going to focus on the most. And I remember seeing video of me and the other guys, and I'm like, man, I am like so barrel chested and stubby compared to these guys, just the odd man out. And that was in track. And then you put me in bodybuilding, and like my main issue is like, oh, you're not barrel chested enough. You're dangly, like, yeah. So it's funny how that is, and just how different the requirements for like from one sport to another differ so much.
Yeah, it really does. And yeah, something like track and field, you almost, like you said, it was hurtful there, but then you got into bodybuilding, it was like, now you're not enough barrel chested, like you said. So it's funny how that works out. So real quick, again, on your background, I mentioned you're a coach at 3DMJ. So just so people know, so your coach still coach clients. Is it like full time for you, or what does that look like?
Yeah, it's been full time since 2000. Man, I like to say probably like 10, 11. So, before it was, yeah, it was a a choice you made that seemed kind of volatile is what like online coaching was, right?
Yep.
And I think now it's pretty safe to say that like, okay, it's going to be around forever, but because it's perfect, right? It's like if you have this very specific need, I think now more than ever, like rather than being limited to the talent in your backyard, it's like you can scout the whole world, find the person that's really good at this one particular thing, and that meshes with you. Um, so yeah, but still, back then I'm like, really, is this how long is this going to last? I feel like a fraud almost, right? Because it was online. There was online personal training, I guess, because that's what you are, and then like in person training, and it seems so like limiting. Like how can you train someone online? But again, very different demographic. So, but we've been doing it for over a decade at this point. We started out as we wanted to put out information more than anything, put out information, highlight the sport. But if you put out good information, like eventually people are like, hey, like can I borrow your brain to help me out? And one thing led to another, and like here we are, like still doing the damn thing. And yeah, it's been amazing to see. Like part of the reason that we wanted to put out information like years past, or when we started, was because they just needed information. It was so terrible what was out there, and now like we've come full circle, and like especially seeing like the young 20 somethings, like the data driven guys. Like I see those kids, and I'm like, man, like you're so ahead of
Yep.
like where like we were, and dude, like 10, 15 years from now, like we'll have some 12, 13-year-old like muscle nerd prodigies. So things are generally heading in the right direction, and then I think, yeah, and it's been nice to like be able to have contributed to that for like well over a decade at this point.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think it's always useful to have people on that have done the training side of things, like very knowledgeable there. You've obviously got yourself in great shape. You've competed multiple times. You're natural bodybuilder, pro natural bodybuilder, and then on top of it, you also have the coaching experience too. 10+ years doing that. So I think you have a lot of wisdom to share, and I love just kind of picking people's brain like you, and just kind of get see the methods that you've used, and things that you find to be useful, because I think you can obviously go and learn all this stuff, but going in and actually applying it, and working with people, I feel like it's just super invaluable. And a lot of people, I think, skip over that part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
yeah. So what I want to, so to go off that, I want to kind of switch gears. We got a decent amount of knowledge on your background. So kind of switching gears and kind of talking about your most recent prep. And so you mentioned that you had competed recently. I think it was 2022 was that 20 that you competed. So just maybe kind of a little overview of it, how it went, and then we'll kind of dive into some specifics of it along the way.
Yeah. Well, I think what was most different for me, I think this was the first year I got to focus on the WNBF circuit. So that was originally where I got my pro card. That was the pro card that I wanted, like from the start. But for a number of different reasons, like I just like the years I would compete wouldn't align with competing with the WNBF. Yeah, so this year it's like, okay, I get to be on the WNBF world stage. So just getting up there was yeah, I was like, all right, yeah, I got to do this at least once, man. I'm gonna do it many more times. I hope from this point on. But that was a main objective, and like usual, like you have all these new concepts that some of them you've seen with your athletes that you want to try out on yourself, and benefit from them as well. And then there's other things that you're like, all right, not that I don't experiment with my athletes. I let them know ahead of time, like, okay, this is worth a try. It seems to make sense. But yeah, then there's other things where you're like, all right, let me, give this a try, see if this makes a difference. So, like, yeah, it's like I want to win. I love the grind as an athlete. I love having something to pursue, but it always sharpens up your sword when it comes to how useful you can be to others. And one thing I always remember, like like it's you always feel that, okay, since I've competed before, I should be good and dandy to help out these athletes with competitive deadlines. But there's nothing like dipping yourself in that once again and feeling all the pressures that they feel, because you always feel like you're behind. You always feel like everything's so volatile. There's always these head games, and to place yourself back in that situation just refreshes, like, yeah, a few things, like, for you as a coach. And yeah, it helps you become a better coach. So yeah.
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 Yeah, absolutely. I think going through it definitely, it allows you to relate to the client or athlete better. So I guess for you, you kind of mentioned there was a couple of things that you wanted to implement this time around. What were some of those kind of things that you tried out this time around?
Man, so I think on the prep side, not a whole lot of things that were that different. Prep as in I guess the main thing that changes, like the the calories, right? Um, yeah, I think when I compare it to my last prep before that, which was 2017, 2020 kind of ruined things for me, like a lot of people. And I was skeptical about 21. I'm like, this might not happen. Yeah, I'd say I backed off the step counts a little bit. I think they are great when it comes to just keeping your baseline levels of like meat intact, just to make sure that you're not sloughing it around. But I think last time they got up to like 12,000, something like that, towards the end. Um, and this prep I did, I think 2 laps around the block almost every day. Like, that was it. So it ends up being like, I end up getting like 5,000-6,000 steps a day between that and like the gym. So just more so keeping that stable. And again, like I'm an easy loser when it comes to fat loss. So yeah, did that, did some formal cardio for once. Like, that was different. And I think that one more so just for general health purposes. I'm like, all right, let's try to see if we can have this habit, create this habit and try to keep it during the off season. And so far so good. I'm keeping up with some amounts of cardio. But yeah, the biggest thing was just with the step counts. I think those can get a little outrageous at times.
Yep.
Like, you'll hear from athletes, eventually they're like, oh, like my foot, calf, like, and not only that, but it takes up these like big chunks of time. So I think especially sometimes with males, like, it's like, maybe just don't eat, or eat less rather, as opposed to, spending 2.5 hours of your day just walking nowhere. Like, that can get pretty stressing, man. It's almost like, it's like a cage in itself. With women, obviously, it's probably better than you pick a little bit more so on the physical activity side of things. But with them, it's like, you know what? They usually don't mind formal cardio, and they can handle it a little bit better than us. Like, hey, do that. So I think that kind of reeled the step thing like this way a little bit for me. And I'd say, on average, like, I think going forward, what I'm going to try to do with athletes is like, all right, let me give you that. Let's figure out your baseline step count, like in the off season. Let's up it by a little bit, and then maybe up it once, but let's not touch that again, because there's a lot of, it's almost like the macros, like part two, with like, how neurotic people can get with that. So that was one change. I'd say the other one was probably, everything else is pretty standard. Yeah, I think with my training, I was a little bit more defensive than in years prior. I think in years prior, it was one of those things where it's like, I got to keep my strength, whatever it took to gain that muscle. I need to do something that's like as similar as possible to that to keep it. And I let go of, that mentality a little bit this off season. I guess the best way I could describe it, because this is going to look so different from person to person, it felt like it was a boxing match. I was clearly ahead by points, and like, we have 4 rounds to go. It's like, I'm not going to get KO'd here. I'm just going to like basically like do what it takes to have the fight be over with. I win. All right, let's go. so that's the approach I took, where like years prior, like, like, yeah, that can be its own rabbit hole, where now you have this like body that's overly stressed. Like prep is stressful enough as it is. And it shows on your physique. Like we're so much more transparent when we are in such a volatile state. So those were probably the two biggest changes, was like the easing up on the step count, and when it comes to the training, being a little bit more defensive with it, especially during the second leg of the prep.
So when you say defensive, it just like kind of backing off like the intensity essentially, or volume, or both, or
so I'd say for me, where because it's gonna look a little bit different with everyone. There's a few examples of this. So like with the compound movements, there was maybe times where I would insist on keeping a load here, even though maybe you can't necessarily see it, but there's some changes in technique. So there's more fatigue to, the fatigue to stimulus ratio is not as favorable anymore. So this year it's like, no, like when I felt like it was appropriate, okay, let's just say I'm handling the 115-pound dumbbells on the flat. I'm like, those don't feel like the 115s anymore. They feel like what the 120s would have felt like to me in the off season. Let me go down to the 110s. Okay, this generally feels the way the 115s would. And I did that a whole lot, where it's like, all right, while load is a great proxy for tension, it doesn't tell you the whole story. And I mean, even people who they're specialists when it comes to strength, powerlifters, like they know that like the guys one weight class higher, they're stronger, and and the guys that are one weight class lower than you, you're going to be stronger than them. So as you're losing weight, like during a contest prep, you're going to reach that point where it's like, all right, like you're going to have to adjust the loading based on like what you are currently right now. I did a whole lot of tracing. Like the RDL was probably the biggest example of this, where I was moving it up for a while, because hinges, I think, they can tolerate what a caloric deficit does a little bit better than, say, pressing. With my RDLs, I remember, okay, they were steadily climbing. I'm like, all right, I'm not going to climb this up anymore. I'm just going to keep performing this load until like prep is over. Like, so, and it got easier for a while, and eventually started to get harder again. But so yeah, like things like that, or being less stubborn about changing movements, because shoot, this isn't as comfortable anymore. Now that I'm, ultra lean. So yeah, and I think this takes a little bit of experience to like for example, with like the dumbbell, like it's like, okay, these, you're getting these 115s, they feel like 120s in the off season. But I think it's a skill worth like trying to figure out. And yeah, it's just made for a physique that was just less beat up, man, less beat up, and it made like everything so much more predictable.
And so like by doing that, again, it just sounds like you said, that's kind of your experience of working with clients and you training for so long that you were able to, like you said, kind of develop that skill and get better at that. I feel like that's probably something that happens each time you prep, or even just train in general. The longer you do it, it's like you start figuring those things out, and you're able to work around that much better as you get more experience. And I do feel like that's kind of the trend when it comes to prep, like in terms of training, and when you're in a deficit, it seems like people are kind of backing off that intensity just a tiny bit, and just being smarter with your training rather than just kind of pushing yourself into the ground when you're already, you have that big stress of the calorie deficit. So I guess for you, so it sounds like injury wise, like less kind of like just aches and pains throughout, that is one of the main benefits that you saw from doing it this way.
Yeah, I felt like so in control, like to the point where I think at certain legs I was like, I could progress if I wanted to, but I'm not going to. It's like, we'll just keep doing this thing here. Again, like scorecards, we're ahead by points. We're just going to keep our distance. We're going to survive until the bell rings and cash in. And then once we have the funds, we can start, striking and working on doing things we've never done before. But you know what? I think intuitively, a lot of lifters know this. Like most young men in the gym, like if you were to ask them, like, would you lift different weights if like this was just like your private gym and no one was here?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Right? They probably would, right? So, so it's kind of, yeah, it goes back, that voice in the back of your head, like it suggests things. I mean, it's not always right, but when it comes to certain things, like there's, yeah, it's worth tuning into that. And even if you're not prepping, yeah, especially when it comes to, um, yeah, like how you behave in the gym, like with like other dudes,
Yeah.
or like it's just important to catch yourself and like it's like, okay, what is like appropriate for me, like in regards to load? What can I actually recover from rather than what I'm willing to do? Yeah.
Sounds like ego, right? That's basically what that is, your ego, right? When you go into the gym and you want to, keep up with what somebody else is doing. So it sounds like really for you, the big thing was you just kind of really reduce like stress outside, like again, backing off the step counts, not just like pushing that, training, dialing that back too. So how did that kind of turn out in terms of your overall look? It sounds like it went pretty well. During
Yeah.
this prep.
Actually, one thing I forgot to mention was sleep. I was like, I stayed on top of my sleep. Like that was a huge one. Yeah, just I've never been the best sleeper, and I'm like, all right, let's try to figure this out. Got me a Fitbit, and I'm like, all right, um, let's just see where we're at, and see if we can tell the difference when we're able to change it up a little bit. And yeah, man, when my sleep scores were higher, I wouldn't say it didn't feel like dieting, but everything was like as easy as it could be, like within that context. So so yeah, stress management like was huge because it's already it's a super stressful situation. Anyone who's prepped will tell you this. It's like, yeah, things are just like different. Yeah, your body's like on like econo mode, like, right? So yeah. The look itself was good, was better than ever, I'd say. Think up a lot of it was just like having a good off season, and then just like I'd say, well, yeah, keeping that, because like I think I've worked so hard in the past. I think the season that I became pro qualified, like I look back and I'm like, man, like, dude, you worked hard, but probably like too hard, probably to a fault,
Yeah.
where you took off some pounds that it's like, where did those even like come from? I think the show that I won my pro card in, I weighed in at the day before, I think like 151, 152. Insane. So, which is like a 10-pound difference from like where I was for this last show.
Cool. So now you're up to 160 for around 160 for show weight and things like that.
About, yeah. So
Cool. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And do you feel like for you, as you do kind of each prep, do you find that, it gets easier, or do you find that it gets like there's always something else, some other new kind of challenge to tackle that makes it just as hard? But yeah, I'm curious to hear how that went.
it definitely gets easier. I mean, it's to the point where, I mean, if I was a single guy, I'd probably prep this year, like, because Eric's doing it, Jeff's doing it, but I'll give her a break. But yeah, it just gets like, it took me a week post show to like just kind of recover. So there's a few things that like for sure, just like physiologically, it's like, okay, like I have like I benefit from those just genetically, but I'm always looking for ways to make it more efficient, to keep athletes healthier, like to, and then in my case, since I'd say probably since 2011, like after that prep, I'm like, okay, I think I have a decent handle on this. Like I'll just throw in extra little challenges there. So like in 2014, I remember I did USAPL nationals and a pro bodybuilding show like 4 days apart. Just to say I did it. And what was it? And then, oh yeah, and then like this prep, I didn't like track really. I just kind of like went off behaviors. So yeah, eventually, I guess this is how I found myself when it comes to like bodybuilding. It's like it's like, all right, I'm kind of tired of being just like a gym rat that shows up like 5, 6 days a week. I need that next thing. And even within like competition prep, like you look for other little challenges, and it doesn't have to be any of the one. You don't have to go do a powerlifting meet like I did. It can just be, hey, I'm going to, if anything, excel at work even more, like during this contest prep. Yeah, yeah. So I think that's important, because especially when you are kind of like in that mode, like you know how it goes, like there's this mode of urgency that your brain kind of undertakes when you are going through a contest prep. I think it's an excellent time, so long as it's appropriate and you're not asking too much. So you have to assess carefully here to try to generate and create new goals for yourself, like whatever it might be. So something that I do suggest athletes do, it's like, hey, you know, you been wanting to read more for a while. It's like, hey, perfect time to start. It's like maybe during your contest prep. So yeah, I think like all athletes, we're always looking for, you know, that next mountain to climb, and while contest prep is, it's quite the mountain. It's like there's other little things you could supplement it with.
Yeah, the two shows I did, and then I've done like a couple photo shoots just to get lean and have some sort of goal at the end. And I've always found that like during that period of time, I've always like just it seems like it just breeds like structure, right? Like you just have a ton of structure during that time, and a good routine and everything like that. So that's definitely something that I've noticed as well. So to go back to the nutrition side of things, you did kind of hit on this. You did say you kind of didn't track. And I know that was kind of one thing that I heard going around, that, you know, you were trying to not track during this period of time. So I'm just curious, how was that? Was there any kind of main takeaways from doing that?
Yeah. You know, I think even if you like were a Gen 1, like IIFYM, you know, Macronator Deluxe, like probably had a pretty set schedule of things that you ate. You know, like most people like their routines, especially people who bodybuild. And eventually you kind of see that, okay, this is what, like, I don't know, my breakfast looks like when I'm this weight, when I'm trying to get to this weight, when I'm trying to go up to this weight. So like all these things kind of just turn into behaviors anyways. And like for me, since I think I counted, it was like almost like 50 months of prep that I have under my belt. I'm like, I kind of know what it feels like to get to this point, and how much it should suck from like 170 to 165 and 165 to 160, and what generally what I'm eating looks like. And I feel like it gets rid of a lot of the decision making, like stress, when you know you're not sitting there thinking about, okay, which of these like 5 stock breakfasts am I going to have today. People think it's hard, but if anything, I think it made life a whole lot easier, because sometimes what the numbers do is they kind of quantify your suck for you. Like, you know, let's just say someone, like, they have to be on the 1,200 calories to get what they want. Like it feels like 1,200 calories because, you know, it's 1,200 calories. And I think that's the one perk that like the people who have their bro coaches with the menu, and this is what you eat, this is just what you eat.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are negative and bad about that, but I'd say one good feature there is that, hey, you don't got to think about it, you just got to execute. So um yeah, like I think, for example, like you could probably get yourself to this weight without tracking, or this weight without tracking, and I feel like I just like took it an extra step, but that's just because I've walked that path like so many times. So if anything, I feel like it was easier, and it kind of, I think what IIFYM was trying to do, like it actually did for me, where it was even like more pliable, where it's like, hey, if I need an extra 200 calories today, mind you, I'm not counting them, but it's like, okay, just gonna have an apple or something. Like I could have that because it was a long day, did some extra work in the yard, whatever, right? Like I feel under recovered, or I feel shittier than I need to feel, like given where I am in the prep, to have an extra apple. Or sometimes it's the other way around, where it's like, hey, you know what? Like today, I can strike. Today feels like a good day. Like I slept well. I'm not hungry. You know what? I'm gonna abolish a lot of the carbs, like for this like dinner meal. So yeah, I think if anything, like, as much as people are like, dude, you are a master at this, it's like you could probably do this within like the weight ranges that are relative to you, relevant to you. Just do it. Like, I think it's something everyone should try once they've gotten to, each goalpost a few times.
Yeah, I could see that too, where like, again, just like you've been trying to take the stress off of everything else, just not having to hit a certain number or something like that just took some more stress off of everything as well too. Cause like you said, it's like if you see 1,200 calories on a paper or on an app, like that's just going to not feel like a lot of food. And you're already kind of like stressing yourself out just from that.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. You wake up every day with the fresh macros, and then like you hit your breakfast up, and you're like, oh my God, like I just lost 700 instead of the 500 I was supposed to. So yeah, these things matter, man. So I definitely, I don't think I'll go back to doing it any other way, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Did you do this all the way through, or towards the end, did you start to track a little bit more, like once you got down to like a certain weight where it's like, okay, I don't think I'm going to be able to push this any further now once I've gotten down to here?
No, I did it the whole way through.
You did? Okay.
Yeah. I think the only thing that was a little bit different was maybe for the peak weeks, I definitely just like, it was just reminders like, okay, every meal just have this much carbs and keep the fats under this, but at no point was I plugging it in.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like this prep really was all about just, reducing the stressors overall. And it sounds like it went pretty well. So I want to switch gears here and talk about your current training. So I'm just curious to kind of hear how that is. Just maybe some just kind of background on what that currently looks like. And then I have a few follow-up questions on it as well too. So
it's 3 days a week, man. 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, ideally. Trying to think, I don't think I've done this. I don't think I've ever done this since like I've officially been able to like brand myself a bodybuilder. So weird stuff. I think initially the thought process there was just like, okay, post show, I don't know how it works on the enhanced side, but you hear them talk a lot about like the rebound. Beats me. But I know for us, like it doesn't work that way. If anything, it's like you're not going to make like substantial progress until you get to a point where you feel like healthy and normal. So training, like everything else, like that's a stress. So I'm like, all right, even though I feel good, like towards the end of the prep, I'm like, you know what, I feel pretty, like, especially since I brought calories up and that whole thing where like, you're recovering the many weeks ahead of like your final shows. So I had a head start with that, but either way, I'm like, you know what? Everyone always feels like, I mean, how this goes. It's like, you're done with prep. You've been eating for like 2 weeks. You're like, I think I'm normal. And then another week goes by and you're like, oh shoot, okay, I'm not normal. Like that wasn't normal. I think this is normal. And then another week goes by and like, oh dude, I feel so much better than last week. So yeah, to remain my own skeptic, I'm like, all right, let's just do 3 days a week of training from here until January 1st. Mind you, my last show was November 19th. So plenty of weeks, do this through the holidays. Give me some time to like just do things other than bodybuild because, hey, love of my life, but like too much of it of late. So it started off as that. And then eventually I got this idea where I'm like, hey, because this thing just rings so true in many ways. The whole idea, and you hear this when it comes to like many different other fields, that 80% of your results is via 20% of the things you do, right? And I mean, think about it. Like you can go back many years ago with your training, and you're doing all these things that you think matter, and you can go back, talk to that kid, you'd be like, no, this is the pure extract. Like this is what's actually moving the needle. And like, man, I can go back 5 years and I can pick up on a lot of that. So I'm like, all right, let's really do like the minimal amount of work, and let's see if the whatever cocktail you serve up is moving you in the right direction. So it's been really to challenge my skill set. It's been nice to train 3 days a week because it opens me up to a whole lot of other things. But I want to see if with, I think I'm averaging like, I forgot the count, somewhere around 6 sets per body part, maybe, I think, at most, some 4. I want to see if that like has me progressing in the right direction. So yeah, it's been nice. And I think what started as something that I was going to do just to recover from just being a good boy from post prep to like early January. Now I'm going to run it all the way until like March, just to see what we get.
So you said like 4 to 6 sets per muscle group. Is it this frequency like twice a week on everything, or do you have it like 1 time per week, or is it just to kind of depend on the muscle group there?
Yeah, so I guess like breaking this up, let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. So I'm definitely doing things that frequency is twice for upper, once for lower. Lower body, the running joke back when I first started bodybuilding was that natties don't have legs. Like, and if anything, it's like that's the only thing we have, man. Like, it's so hard to get anything above the waist.
Yep.
So legs don't seem to require a whole lot. I think especially in men. They're also like when you look at all the muscle groups here, we're bipedal creatures, so they're always kind of in line with gravity, right? So they're under constant tension, even if you are pretty sedentary. So once a week for me with legs, twice with upper. And what we're doing is we're really trying to focus on spending extra time in those like lengthened positions. So I'm finding movements that take those muscles to those lengthened positions, and I'm doing a lot of like pause work there. And I'll tell you this, like I feel like this might work. I might find out that certain areas still need a little bit more, but when I look at my calves, like my calves are the most developed part of my body, like relatively speaking, compared to where they started. And I remember, I think it was like 2009. Like I was like, all right, this makes sense. You know, long Achilles tendon takes up most of the slack when you are training the calves. So like, you should do them with these like long pauses. And with calves also, it's like I don't care how strong I am, so there's never any ego there. It's just and magically over time, like my calves, like they are, again, they're not impressive, but for considering that they're on me, it's like wow, those have come a long way, and they are insanely strong. Like I've not met a whole lot of people who are stronger than I am when it comes to calves, and it's been like this slow drip over a decade of just like long 2-3 second pauses, legit 2-3 second pauses, because I don't care what I lift there. Not a whole lot of total volume. I think on average, like somewhere around like 4 to 6 sets weekly is all I've ever really done for them. So trying to take a page out of that book, especially with some of the more recent research and what I've seen in practice. And yeah, trying to see just how pure this extract is. And so far, can't be too sure. But I think in another 2 months, like I'll know for sure. It's like, do I continue with this or do I add one more day of training? So far, I haven't lost any muscle, which I don't think is a surprise to anyone who knows. But how great would this be? Like this is all I really need to progress, and like my cocktail is that pure? Because next time I prep, it's like, whoa, it's like, dude, it's like this massive chunk of stress that comes from training. It's like, okay, that's going to be even less. And then outside of that, just for like when it comes to the long term, it's like, okay, I can definitely see myself doing this for another 20, like 30 years, who knows, like 40 years. And it will, I think, definitely enhance not just my longevity in the sport, but for how long I can expect to improve.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think, and so I guess off that, so this volume that you're doing now, obviously, is it a lot lower than kind of what you've typically would have done like in the past?
So I'd say the last year before my prep, with a lot of help from my folks here at N1 Cassim, he's like legit like 45 minutes away. I started to use get a lot of help from him when it comes to selecting my movements and just really fine tuning them. I saw that, like, you know what, I could totally afford to like drop some some volume, and right away I saw the benefit in that, just like less creaky, everything felt better. And I was still progressing at, what I thought was a good rate for my training age. And yeah, so it's like, now it's like, all right, let's push it even a little bit further. Like, and it's still not like Mike Menser hit. Like, it's not like towards the end, like this dude was just like one set or something like that, no, but it's definitely the whole, hey, I'm going to invest like in the S&P as opposed to like, I don't know, some like marijuana stock. Like that's the way I see it, where it's like, okay, this is something that's going to amount hopefully to like, I'd rather take 80% of like my max gains, but stay healthy, right?
Yeah.
Because I think 10, 15 years from now, like that's going to be the right move. And I think not just like for me, who's like, man, I turned 40 in 2 months, but I think even more so for someone, you can get someone who's like 20 to like hop on this sort of like mindset. That young person is deadly. They're going to be something else.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the longevity aspect of it is super important. And it sounds like that's, again, if you can get away with lower volumes and you don't feel as achy and stuff like that, man, I mean, that's going to lend itself, like you said, long-term there. I like the S&P analogy there. I thought that was super helpful. So for you then, so I guess, you kind of mentioned N1 type stuff. It's here, actually, this is where I want to go with this. So like, are you mostly working with like straight sets? Do you incorporate some like intensity type techniques? And what does your typical like rep range kind of look like for your training?
Rep ranges usually right now with this program, they're going to be 4 to 6 for the compounds, 6 to 8 for the other compounds, mostly because if I'm going to be doing these long pauses, it's really hard to stay in it. Yeah. So especially with anything where you're pushing 4 to 6 and just making sure it's a long enough pause in that really lengthened position. With the pulling, I can probably tolerate like slightly, because there's no balancing really, right? So those are usually 6 to 8. And then just because they're smaller joints with the single joint stuff, I'll do anywhere between like 8 to 10, if I recall correctly. In regards to any sort of like intensity techniques, see, when I think of intensity techniques, I think of them as like density work. Like that's really what they are. Like I think they're better. I think a lot of people see them as like bonuses, cherry on top sort of things, but it's more so like, no, you just want to condense what you're doing. Like that's their main utility. But I think the closest thing that I'm doing to that is going to be this current program has none of that, because I'm spending more time in that lengthened position. But sometimes with my rowing, for example, with my calves, I will do this quite often. I will continue to perform reps even when I can like no longer like bring into that fully shortened position. Just because, again, like this is, as far as we know right now, what seems to be the part where you can like, it's the juiciest part of a rep, the lengthened. So to just stop there, because like the less juicy part of the rep says I can't anymore, just it doesn't make sense. So it's like, hey, let's sweep this area a little bit more. So those I will do from time to time. But it's pretty straightforward. I'd say if anything, where I'm really picky is with my exercise selection. And I'd say, well, the main benefit, like when like, I first started getting some help from Kaz, was just, I just want to feel healthier, man. Like that was the main thing, and that was the first thing I saw. Like I have a bone spur here in this right shoulder that anytime I do any sort of like overhead work, whether it's a press or a pull down, like it lets me know. So some of the movements that I use instead, like instead of a super vertical overhead press, I'm a little bit more inclined backwards. Yeah, and my lat work tends to be kind of out here in front of me. Just everything feels good for the first time like in a decade, and even if the differences are they're small, I think first of all at this point in my career, it's like I need that. Like that's it's very appropriate because it really is a game of inches with those guys. But most importantly, it's like, man, like I feel healthier, and like it's, as much as you love this, man, like it can become quite a nag when it's like, man, like I think we've all been there at some point where you're like, is this even like worth it, sort of deal. So there's been far less of those moments over like the last 3 years, and it feels good, man. It feels good because it feels like every day I wake up and I get to like fully celebrate this body that I've earned, as opposed to like, I look at it and I'm like, man, it looks pretty good, but dude, it's a pain in the ass, like literally.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think, yeah, that's super important. Like we said, the longevity of it is important if you're feeling good. And I think bodybuilding too, like bodybuilding style training, these higher volume stuff, I feel like it lends itself to like nothing like acute from an injury standpoint, but more just like, just overuse and overuse type injuries, right? Because it's like you just do it over and over again. And so I think any little bit, like you said, game of inches there, anything that you can kind of change to make it more, you just make it better is going to be good long term there with it.
Yeah, people don't, it's like running, man. It's like you see running and it's like, it doesn't look very high impact and violent, but it's like, no, it's like, ask anyone who's ran for a long time and they're like, yeah, it adds up. And the same thing with like bodybuilders in our reps and our sets. It's in your best interest to like find the healthiest ways to move for you, and try to really see what that 20% that's giving you the 80% of your progress actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's super important. So I know you recently kind of had a post about like warm up sets. So you call it like a PAP, post activation potentiation. Is that something that you're still kind of? I mean, you just posted recently, but is that something that you're doing? And maybe just kind of explain that to the audience there, what you do there and the reasons behind it.
Yeah. So basically, I think everyone stumbled upon it at some point. Where it's like maybe you do a heavy set and then you do your back off like finisher, I think that's what they're called. And it's just like, wow, this finisher just feels like very easy, and it's because you're you're like on like this like kick from like the heavy set you did right before. So basically what you're doing is like you just would warm up the way you typically would, which again, the best way to warm up is like you want to take only as much time as you need to get to your working weight, and hopefully you're fresh. But instead of doing your working weight, you would pick a load. I think for me, it kind of depends on the movement, but generally it's something that I can hit for sure 1 rep with like 2-3 reps in the tank. I think when you're first starting off with this, maybe do the 3 to 4 reps in the tank. But as you get better at it, like, okay, you can get a little bit closer to failure with that single. And what you're going to see that once you go back down to your working weight, that you're like, oh, wow, like a lot of the inhibition is gone. You feel so much more confident. This is something that generally I will use mostly when it comes to a weight that I just arrived to. So it's like it's this. So I don't use it all the time, but if this next increment upwards, like I'm maybe a little nervous about, or it's just been rough. Like what I'll use the whole PAP thing, and yes, it works from like a neurological drive standpoint, but a big part of that is also going to be it's in your head,
Yep.
So much less inhibition when you bring it back down after that heavy set. So yeah, I think that's where the biggest utility for this is when you are graduating to the next load. It's going to make it less intimidating.
Yeah, that makes sense. So again, you're not going to do this like all the time, but like you said, if you're about to grab like a new weight, just because like you said, it's like when you jump up 5 pounds on like a dumbbell, it's like that really makes a big difference. So if you can go a little bit heavier than that, it makes that jump just a tiny bit easier. It almost reminds me of, I don't know if you played baseball growing up or not, like you'd always like warm up with like the thing on the bat and you'd always go a little bit heavier, and then you get the regular bat and it was just super light.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember that. Yeah, that's exactly what it's like. I think especially with women, this is highly useful because I think if anything, guys tend to be overly confident sometimes. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But like if she just got to the 40-pound dumbbells, like from the 35s, like we got some 42.5s or something. Like hey, just do those for one, and clobber that set, that rep. It's just yeah, it just puts you at ease that like, I'm not going to die here, man.
Well, and like you said, I think the important thing too is don't like load up your like 1 rep max on it, right? Like you said, you got it. You want to keep some reps in reserve and make sure that it's heavy, but it's not like to where, because you don't want those warm up sets to be super fatiguing or anything like that. So cool. How do you, you kind of mentioned like, hey, I'm going to pay attention to if I'm making progress or not. How do you like go about that? Like, how do you measure if you are making progress from like a muscle building standpoint? Just because, it is super tough to know on like the short term like that. So I'm curious to hear how you, kind of what you like look at there on that.
Yeah. Shoot. Like, so the Twitter, man, has been like just my idea dump. Basically, it's just like, I'm just going to throw things out there and whatever catches on, it's like, okay, this is what like, it's a democracy. It's like, okay, I'll eventually do something long form about this. Because and quite often the topics that I find interesting is like, hey, no one cares. Okay, all right, whatever. But one thing I did post was I think learning to hit a front and back relax, even if you don't want to compete. And these are the easiest poses to learn. And then they're the least flickery poses as well. So for example, like a back double bicep, you could take someone who's throws one of those up like every once in a while, and you can take 10 different pictures of them, and they're all going to look a little different. It's like, oh, this one looks like he looks more dense. This one looks more wide. The shoulders are better here. But the front and back relax, they're super easy to set, super consistent. So I'd say the main form of data that you should be extracting things from at the end is going to be your physique. And I know what would be politically correct to say would be, it's like, oh, well, your performances. Well, yeah, true. Like, but I think they're almost one-to-one in some ways, because there's a lot of things that you can't capture on a spreadsheet or a notebook when it comes to progressions. Little things like, it's like, oh, it's like maybe it's about the same weight, but your technique's getting better, right? Or the reps are more fluid and they're less clustery, things like that. So yeah, I'd put that right up there. It's like, it's like, you got to show me the receipts, and the receipts are going to be a pain more than anything, like the physique. So learning to hit a front and back relax, get yourself a nice ring light. Like, I think if you are into maximizing body composition, it's like, these are just like must do things, I feel. So yeah, okay, that's set. Yeah, and the next thing will be training, but I think you need to supplement the notes or the spreadsheet, whatever it is, with video. Like, I think it's that important. Like, well, kind of like, I wouldn't say it's a pet peeve, but I think there's a lot of studies that it's like, I'd like to see these sets, like scientists, because I get on my athletes all the time about like, it's like, you need to record this PR that you've been hitting for like 3 straight weeks now. Like, I want to see this. It's such low hanging fruit. It's like, it's right there. Like, it used to be, I used to have to work so hard to sneak in like these like super heavy blocky cameras into the gym so that I can do this like 20 years ago. It's like do it. Everyone's doing it. So yeah, I'd say, yeah, you want to see that objective metrics are going up in regards to performance, but video is just it's a deadly weapon. If we'll do it for a month, and then you'll be like, okay, like I feel naked when I don't have my phone with me to record my sets.
Yeah, I think, and again, what it sounds like, there's really no like great way to do it, right? In terms of, you just kind of have to, kind of check the boxes off. And then from there, like you said, you can look at things like the front and back relax posing, but, and then look at performance. But other than that, I mean, you just kind of have to trust the process almost the rest of the way.
You do have to sit on a plan long enough. Yeah. And just kind of be realistic with like, how long should this take given like my training age?
Yeah. Yeah, that's always the kind of tough thing with it too, because like people always ask like, well, how do I know if, I'm doing enough or if I'm progressing or not? It's just like, I mean, man, you just kind of have to trial and error, right? It takes time and just stay consistent, right? That's one of those things I think that I'm sure you could attest to. It's like, what are your secrets of doing this long term and building muscle? It's like, well, most of it's been I've just stayed consistent, for 20 years training, and that's that's most of it. That's like you said, 80% of what you do is from 20%. So
And that is most of it, because there was times where I was doing all these things to be perfect, and dude, they were a pain in the butt. But I'm like, I need to get my 100% in. And then many years go by, and you're like, oh, so much of that was unnecessary. But what was one thing that was consistent is that I was being consistent. So at the end, like, even if I feel kind of skeptical about this plan, it's like like, be consistent. So I'd say for most people who struggle with this, just find something that like looks sound, that you will have fun with, that you will look forward to, and don't try to be perfect. Like, there needs to be more of a fun element compared to like what someone like myself is doing at this point. Because like for me, fun is like actually making progress, because it's so damn hard to
yeah.
generate any. But yeah, I'd say first decade of your lifting, it's like, oh man, it's like fun needs to be a big part of this, because as you said, man, you need to be consistent.
Yeah, it takes time. And I think that's always a tough thing with building muscle, like with fat loss and weight loss. It's like, you can kind of get that immediate feedback, but it's like with muscle growth, it just freaking takes time. You gotta kind of trust the process with it. So one more thing here to chat about before I'll let you go. So we kind of talked, you did your dreamer block a while back, you got up to 250, and just so like everyone knows, like you said, you competed at 160. So you can only imagine what that 250 looked like. So I think, I read your post on it, and you said there was a lot of good things that came out of it, right? It's like you definitely made sure, you definitely ensured that you built muscle during that period of time. And that would have been better than you kind of like not ever trying to gain any weight or anything like that. So I guess with your athletes, and maybe even yourself, when you are kind of in this gaining phase, and let's say maybe you overshot it a little bit, what's kind of your options there with it? Like what are some, kind of options that you do in terms of, okay, so you overshot it, where do we kind of go from here?
Okay. Yeah, so the 250 I don't recommend. I have such a different era, man. Like, it's just so different. Like, you were under 200 pounds, and like you posted pictures on like bodybuilding forums back then, they'd just be like, kid, you got to bulk.
You gotta get bigger.
Yeah.
Just eat.
So man, I'd say, as you hinted to this, right? It's like fat loss, like it's pretty correctable, man. It's like, it's something where it's like, if you overshoot your gaining phase by 5 pounds, like that's not a whole lot of extra time like in a deficit. Like for a male, it's not. Like with my athletes, what I typically do is like I'll give them like these weight ranges. Like let's just say they're starting at 170, and it's like, okay, in 6 months, I want you somewhere between 175 to 181. And because there's such a bigger landing pad, like now, like a lot of the pressure's off. And what I'll generally see is that they actually tend to gain leaner, I suspect, than they would have had I been like, all right, you got to gain like 0.5% of your body weight every month.
Right.
Like, I can't execute that, man. Even if you ask me to track macros, like that is, but generally, if what you will see is that if you give people these like bigger targets, they arrive somewhere in there, and you divide it up. It's like, oh wow, it's like 0.75 pounds a month is what you ended up gaining. So sometimes like people put on too much pressure when during a gaining phase, when realistically is all you have to do is like eat at an intake that's not ambiguous, that clearly is a surplus, where you're not getting fatter like week by week, but you can kind of look in the mirror and you're like, oh man, that line in the side of my arms, like, okay, that was that he's not there no more. Like that's how, like he disappeared somewhere along the way. Like that's what the rate should look like. And just do it long enough where like you can gain an amount of muscle that was worth taking the time to do this. I'd say for most people that's going to be anywhere between 6 to 8 months. So yeah, I think the one thing I got from that big gaining phase is that I kind of learned to like my body at like many different like looks and shapes, and like for the many things that like it could do. Because bro, I heard it from people. Like, they'd be like, dude, you like relatives, most like, you're fat, and I'm like, no, I'm not. I just hit 160-pound dumbbells on the flat, bro. Like, oh, this is a fun body. You couldn't tell me otherwise. So yeah, I think with the gaining phase, like, of course, at the end you're going to end at like your peak heaviest weight, and then eventually you'll find yourself at your leanest. It's like you just need to learn to like develop a like pros and cons list of like of both ends, and eventually, like, dude, like my shredded body, it's like I like it, like there's something cool about that. But I can't honestly say that I like it more than myself like 20-25 pounds heavier, because that has its own set of perks that I really like love. So yeah, and that's what these kids don't get these days, because back then, like, okay, it's kind of destructive criticism to tell this young man that's like, like 5'10", like 200 pounds, bro, you need a bulk regardless of body fat. But I think one thing it did do for me was the fact that like I didn't feel like I had to stay IG shredded like year round.
Do you feel like people are trying to stay too shredded for too long period of time?
I think what's happening more than anything, it's like people are they're just not doing it for themselves, like, getting back, or primarily for themselves, like going back to like the young man and how he behaves in the weight room with like other young guys. Like it's like the macro version of that, right? Like it's like that's kind of sort of what it's become, when in reality it should really just be, as like, are you getting better? Are you doing the right things like for you? I think that's the biggest issue, and social media has a way of making everyone feel like they're a little bit behind, when like in reality, man, dude, some of the most impressive physiques, impressive stories have been from people who they just kind of, they're just very like introverted themselves. They know exactly what they want, and they just go off to the side and do the things that they want to do for like these long periods of time. And I think that's the bigger problem, like when like your goals aren't even your goals.
Yeah, right. You're right. It's not even what you want, and yeah, that's definitely an issue with social media. So I also like how you kind of talk about with the building too. It's like, or the gaining phases. It's like, hey, I'm gonna give more of a range rather than like, hey, gain this per week, because that can be, like you said, super challenging. So do you, for yourself and maybe in clients, do you have clients like track macros, stuff like that, when they're gaining, or do you go with more of like a, hey, we're just looking at kind of weight gain, making sure you're not eating like way off plan or things like that? But yeah.
So I've kind of pulled away from the macro counting, with the exception of, because I think it's a very, man, it's an important course on your way to like kind of mastering this thing here, the macro course. But you realistically like only need like 3 or 4 months of that, and it's like, okay, like I get it. It's like,
I get it.
there's fat in everything, and it adds up very quickly. But most of the people I get, they're beyond that, and what we tend to focus on is like calories and protein usually. Of course, there's going to be certain cases where it's like, okay, maybe I don't know, someone with PCOS, right? Where it's like, okay, there might be some insulin resistance there, and like the macros will reflect that. So that might be a little different. But generally speaking, I thought many years ago that like I was one of those people who was like, I don't need a whole lot of dietary fat, and really, I think I don't. But I was also taking like my essential fatty acids the whole time, and so maybe that's when my fat I was able to hold somewhere around like 15% of my total calories. So people can argue about these ratios, like the high carb, low carb, the moderate, whatever. But it's really like the high protein diet that like makes everything shine. So I'm more into the whole calorie counting within the confines of a high protein diet, and wherever the person ends up, like is great because that's what they can adhere to the most. So maybe it's 35% of their calories come from fat. Maybe it's like 15, whatever. Like this is what they like. This is what they can be consistent with. Like during my prep, man, it was like freaky weird. Like my Friday night treat was I would go to Whole Foods and I would, you know, their stuff is expensive. I'd go and I'd get a like the most well marbled steak like I could find there. You know, and it's like, oh, I pick it, like I want that one right there. And that was like years ago, that would have blew my mind. It's like, really, you're eating like fatty steak in the middle of your prep? So what it does is it also broadens up people's diet a lot. Like you know, like more things make it onto their plate, and like at the end, it's like that is what we want here. So long as they're reasonably like nutritious choices, mostly. So yeah, I tend to have most people on calories and protein, but eventually I do want them, as discussed before, like I want you to be able to just have they transform these numbers into like behaviors. And like you know, like I said, like the bigger launch, bigger like landing pad like helps the bulkers like feel less constrained, and they get to be like, I mean, I feel like that is it 0.5%. I forget because I don't even use it like the monthly gaining phase. It's like something ridiculous, right?
But I think it's like per week, it's like 0.25%, 0.5%, something like that.
Yeah, it's like working with your boss like right behind like you. Like,
yeah,
this is your type. It's like I can't even do my thing comfortably. Like you are sabotaging the whole operation here, right? So so that's what it feels like to people. And when you kind of like, okay, like this is right, there's no right, no wrong, like so just somewhere in here, they tend to work a lot more comfortably, and they tend to do like so much better. So but eventually, and here's the thing, it's like, okay, there's these ranges, and maybe last time we gained, like you were on the lower side, and this time you're on the higher side. Like I don't see that as like you're taking a step back, because like I don't know, life could have been different for you, you know. But we did the damn thing. What we wanted from this phase, we got. But eventually, yeah, I'll have them just do this, I guess, intuitively, and that brings like even like better results. And then eventually, the real challenge is like, all right, now let's do this like the other way, which is like losing fat. And again, when you can tie it like to behaviors, like there's less decision making fatigue, because okay, you just kind of have to go back to like, all right, what was I kind of sort of eating during like this part of my last diet? All right, let's go back to that. Like it's just it's so freeing, and it's how you make lifers out of people.
Yeah, I definitely like you said, it's nice to have them do that for a little while, but also taking the reins off of it as well too. I like the analogy of it's like having the boss behind you, just over watching everything you do. I love that. I think that's hilarious. Cool. So coming to the end here. So I guess for you, what's kind of the game plan, or kind of the goals for you for the next little bit? Is it to just keep gaining, cutting at any time? What is that going to look like for you over the next little bit?
Yeah, you know, the bodybuilding thing, just it's like people are gonna, I think especially some of my like the diehards out there, it's kind of on cruise control, man. Because I'm, you know, again, I'm, even if I wasn't training 3 days a week, like at this point, it's just what I do, man. Like even when I think like I've kind of backslid a little bit in regards to like my behaviors, like if you follow me, if a normal person followed me around like for a week, they'd be like, this dude's out of his freaking mind. There's just so much to keep up with, right? So that just kind of does its thing. I'm really invested in it. Like I want a world championship at some point, so I have to be. But I think like so the main focus right now has been like I'm writing a fat loss book, and oh God, it is so hard. Like it's gonna be so hard to let go of that thing. Like even when it's like ready to go, like I know it's gonna be like no, just give me 1 more month. And I think a lot of it just it was supposed to be a contest prep book, but then I'm like, oh man, like no, I know what's gonna happen. Like some people who tend to be, you know, the more just casual committed gym rat, they're gonna want to do that. So it's like, all right, you got to at least have the intermediate section.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh shoot, no. And then like some of those like people shouldn't even be dieting, right? Like they don't even have the fundamentals in place. So it started off with like, okay, a contest prep, but I wrote the beginner section, I'm in the middle of the intermediate section right now. I haven't even started the contest prep side, but I think that one will fly because at that point, like these people should know everything else that has been covered. But it's been, man, it's been hard. I think like, yeah, it's been hard, and it's been nerve wracking to think like at some point, like I'm gonna put this out there. I've never done anything like this, and it's your baby, but it's going to be judged in all sorts of ways, and misinterpreted, and you know how it goes, man. So yeah, that's what I've been doing 3 days a week, is just pounding away at that, and that's been the main focus. Because hey, you know, as an athlete, like, you know, we all want some sort of like legacy and like footprint in this, and okay, like that's kind of set in stone, I feel. But like I want to leave something like outside of that that can like help others, and maybe inspire again, like that prodigy 12-year-old kid, you know,
Yep.
to like take this stuff to like a whole different level. So yeah, that's what I've been up to.
Awesome, man. Yeah, that's going to be, that'll be really good. I mean, if you're putting it out, I think it's going to be great. It sounds like it's cool that you're doing it in like beginner, intermediate, you know, contest prep, just because like you said, it seems like it's the same when I'm like putting out content. It's like, oh wait, if I say that, somebody's going to take it that way. You just kind of start overthinking everything. Right. So, that's just kind of how it goes, but yeah, that's awesome. Any idea when you think that will, be done, or just too far out to know at this point?
So initially it was supposed to be done by the end of the contest prep. And no, okay, so then like my birthday's in March. So like March, I'll at least have like the rough parts of it done. And I think like now it's like March, I'll probably have and like the intermediate section done. Hopefully it's kind of looking that way, cutting it close. So honestly, it probably won't be until, hey, it kind of ties in, I guess, like when I'm probably prepping again. So it works out in that way. But yeah, man, like it's been a process.
Yeah, I've always just heard from people like through podcasts and stuff like that. That's always just a really tough process, writing stuff like that. So, but that's awesome, man. Looking forward to seeing that. So, I guess, is there anywhere else, anything else you want to point the audience to or lead them to find you?
Yeah, shoot, like our website, 3D Muscle Journey. We have a whole lot of solid people contributing to that. It started with just coaches, and now we have specialists, you know, specialists in like their own fields. Like, you know, we have a registered dietitian on staff, PT, someone that helps us with like the mental side of things. Amanda, she's amazing, and they're all contributing. So check it out. If you like what we have there on the surface, we have the vault, which is like those are courses that we have there that and they're getting better and better. And my most recent contribution was, it's funny, and you will appreciate this because, you know, as a content creator, sometimes you almost feel like you are almost creating for your peers in a way, like,
Yep.
and when in reality it's like no, it's like you need to serve the people, man, because you know, right. But sometimes we don't know exactly where those folks are at. So I made on our vault, I made a course that was contest prep planning, and like how to construct like your macro plan so that you have put yourself in a good position to prep. But no, it was how to set up your calories. Like that course was the one that like just blew up for us. So
Awesome.
you know, it's like so yeah, we're keeping an eye on like what it is that the people want, and trying to pump out the courses that they want on the vault.
Yeah, that is always the challenge. It's like you end up, like you said, you got to be careful and make sure you're not trying to write for your peers. Like you said, I feel like sometimes it can feel like you're doing that, and that can be a challenge. But that's awesome. Yeah. So I'll link the website, and you said Instagram. Anything else? Anywhere else where anybody can find you, or is that?
No, that's primary. No TikTok yet, man. For now,
yeah.
we'll see if we sell out.
I love it. All right, Berto, well, appreciate your time, man. A ton of great information in here. And we'll talk to you soon.
Right on. Thank you for having me.